Okay, good morning. Maybe we can already start if you're okay. Elena, Henrik, Jorge, and Bernard.
Sergio, thank you very much for inviting all of us to this roundtable. My name is Elena Canetti. I'm going to introduce myself in a minute. But first of all, I would like to introduce the speakers and the companions in this roundtable. The subject of this roundtable is worldwide best practices for successful technology transfer. With me are Antonio Gomez, Bernard Munoz, Henrik Redin. Antonio Gomez is Alliance Manager at the Janssen Pharmaceutical Companies of Johnson & Johnson, Spain. He's a new ventures lead and scientific liaison for Johnson & Johnson. Bernard Munoz is Senior Fellow at Faster Cures of Milken Institute, founder at InnoThink, Center for Research in Biomedical Innovation, and independent non-executive director at Glenmark Pharmaceuticals, advisor and board member of several companies. Henrik Redin is Director External Research and Exploration Coordination at Volvo Cars, board member at Smart High Tech, former president ASTP Proton, and founder of the Swedish Network for Innovation and Technology Transfer Support. And myself, Elena Canetti, I'm a partner at Inveniam Group. I was in the past vice president of technology transfer at an American company, Marqera, and former vice president collaborations at Yissum, the research development company of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel. Well, the objective of this roundtable is to discuss and share with you best practices among different ecosystems to facilitate innovation and technology transfer in the field of health tech. I would like to start to hear from each one of my colleagues a very brief introduction, highlighting something of their previous experience in technology transfer. I would like to start with Henrik. So please, if you could introduce yourself and share with us some previous experience in technology transfer.
Thank you so much, and such a pleasure to be in this very illustrious team, and thank you for the invitation. I worked since 2003 in various aspects in technology transfer for Chalmers University of Technology, and for 10 years, and then I went to industry and worked for the other side, so to say, trying to get hold of good research results for the benefits of the society when it comes to job creation. Later, I also spent 6 years with the Institute of Medicine at the Gothenburg University here. So quite a wide range of technology transfer experience. And I have to say, I always ended medicine because people in the medicine department always know what the aim is of the research. And this is such a great thing for tech transfer because all the physicians knows which patient they want to cure. We don't see that at all in technology, unfortunately. All the professors in technology see that this is something I want in my lab. So you actually have a big advantage when it comes to medicine. When it comes to tech transfer, I think also what my experience shows so far is, as you all know, it's a people's game. And we're in building the effort, we're building the strength, and we're just in the beginning. So working for the Institute of Medicine at the hospital and university-based part, of course, it was a lot about building capacity, getting the skillful people that know everything in research and know everything in clinical parts of their profession to understand that it's not necessarily simple to transfer that knowledge into actual progress for the patients, for society, in products. And that is also a skill set that's lacking today in academia to a large extent. So I have so many good examples of when it works, but the number of examples is too few because the knowledge about what to do, how to do it, and when to do it is simply not in place because we haven't trained the researchers properly. It's not their fault, of course. They have been trained for a different task. And this is where I see that we can actually do great things together as a community. Communities are very important for me, as you understand from my CV. I love the networking. I think we're building great things on the global level, on the European level, national level, US, etc. We have Autumn, and of course all the national organizations. So I'll stop there. I hope that's answered the question.
Yes, thank you, Henrik. I would like to now move forward to Antonio. Antonio, could you please introduce yourself and highlight something from your previous experience in technology transfer?
Well, thank you very much, Elena, and thank you very much, Sergio and Vicente, for giving me the opportunity to be here and to be present in this meeting. So I have been working for Janssen, for J&J, for more than 25 years now. So it means that I have always been in this side, right, of technology transfer. But I think I'm lucky enough to have lived different stages of this process. So I started getting involved with the technology transfer like almost 20 years ago. By then it was chemistry, only chemistry, and it was what I would say was like the old way of doing things. When we from the pharma, we were approaching the academic groups, we were buying whatever they had, and then, yeah, I give you this, you give me the compounds, and then, yeah, it's not we forget about each other, right? But it was not really collaborative at all. It was, yeah, I get what you have, this is what interests me, and that's all. Then starting in 2012, 2013, I started getting involved with the new initiative of Johnson & Johnson Innovation, the innovation centers. And this is a very different approach. So this is collaboration. This means that we are no longer just giving you the money and getting the asset. We want to work together. And I think this actually, yeah, this works much better. And I think we need to carry on working on that direction. In fact, now, as Elena said also at the beginning, I'm also in the Global Discovery Alliance Management Group. So I'm in the next step, which is after a deal has been signed, and I'm in the what happens afterwards, which is actually collaboration. So I think this is the way we have been moving since the early 2000s, and yeah, I think this is the way we need to keep on moving in the future. And yeah, I will stop here, and yeah, we will keep talking.
Thank you, Antonio. I would like to move now to Bernard. Bernard, please go ahead, introduce yourself, and share with us some previous experience in tech transfer.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bernard Munoz, or yeah, Munoz or Munoz for all of you in Spain. And I've joined the pharmaceutical industry 42 years ago. And 30 years of that was spent working for a large pharmaceutical company, Eli Lilly. And after 20 years there, I became very worried about the state of innovation. You know, back then, for those of you who were, you know, old enough to be engaged in industry back then, the culture was very regimented. And, you know, as a trained scientist, I knew that that was not propitious, that was not auspicious to, you know, allowing people to express themselves and their ideas. So I started to look at, you know, where innovation comes from. I mean, we spent all those billions of dollars, and where did it come from? And nobody knew across the industry the answer to that question. So I started to do research, and one concept that attracted me back then is this idea of open innovation. Open innovation back around 2000 had already transformed the software industry in ways that had been, you know, very, very profound. And there was some talk of perhaps applying those concept to pharmaceuticals. So since we didn't understand very well what the dynamics of innovation were in the industry, I was concerned that the application of those the concept of innovation would be very but perhaps disruptive and perhaps destructive of a lot of things in the industry. So I started to do some research and published a couple of papers, one on open innovation and the other one on pharmaceutical innovation. And it turned out that I was not the only person worried about innovation in industry back then. There was a lot of people, and those two papers resonated a great deal. And for the last 10 years, I have seen actually the concept of tech transfer. Tech transfers existed for as long as the pharmaceutical industry has existed. But as Jorge explained, it was pretty much, kind of a hands-off thing. Give me your money, I give you the money, you give me your asset, and then I don't want to see you again. What happened in the last 10 years is that, the scientists have done their job and have delivered, an explosion in biomedical knowledge. And there was more biomedical knowledge there that could be leveraged really by the pharmaceutical industry. There was more to be explored that could be explored by the entire, large pharmaceutical companies. And parallel with that, we had a change in the cost of innovation, which started to plummet. So the combination of all that is that we've seen literally hundreds, thousands of small companies being born and engaging in, exploring the new biology and coming up with ideas on how to attack diseases in ways that we hadn't thought of before. And some of the leaders in the large pharmaceutical industry started to take notice that there was a lot of interesting ideas there, more than they could pursue, within their own companies. And perhaps it was time to develop, the capability to manage this network of innovation there, develop connections with all those entrepreneurs who had ideas. They did not really aspire to become another big pharma. They just wanted to pursue what they thought was a bright ideas and work with large pharmaceutical companies in order to bring those ideas to life, to produce medicine. I think that has produced a deep change in a culture of innovation from something that was inward-looking to something that is now outward-looking. And the result has been astounding. I mean, 20 years ago, when the industry was producing 20 new drugs per year, it was an extraordinary year. Now we routinely produce 50, 60 new drugs per year, and we're still going up. And the difference is really the contribution of the small companies. It's a contribution of tech transfer.
Thank you very much, Bernard. I would like now to introduce myself briefly. I am Elena Canetti. I have been many years working at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem as Vice President Industry, at Vice President Scientific Collaborations between the university and the industry. My experience in technology transfer was mainly developed from an academic point of view. I was always on the side of the academia and not on the side of the industry like Bernard or Antonio or Enric. And I was always trying to defend the intellectual property of the university and handle very difficult negotiations with companies, with large pharma, to try to protect our interests. But slowly, I discovered that the key is the word that some of you mentioned, collaboration. You cannot come from a position of give me what I want and I don't want to see you anymore, because this doesn't work like this. And I will say that in my 15 years at Yissum, the research development company of the Hebrew University, I learned to talk to industry. I learned to listen and not only to talk. I try to understand their pains. I try to communicate to the best possible my own pains as representative of the university, and to negotiate from a win-win position. Slowly, we moved from being a very, let's say, non-reasonable technology transfer company of a university to be a very collaborative one, trying to make the best business for both parties. Of course, trying also to get some economic incentive for the university, which is extremely important, but also trying to understand both sides of the equation and trying to reach the result that is the most important result, a license agreement or the creation of a spin-off company with investors, but always with the intention of bringing the technology to the market. So without no more introduction, we would like to open the debate, and I would like to throw the first question to any of you. Just say who wants to start. My first question is, what is the main issue that prevents the commercialization of knowledge? And how would you solve it? Someone would like to start?
Maybe I can step in. To me, and I think, there are, of course, there can be many different answers to that. But I think, to me, I would say misalignment between academia and industry. So when I say that, I mean that the objectives in each of those two worlds are different. And you can see, maybe not so much in the US. In the US, you see that there is like more, in fact, there's more exchange of people. In Europe, there's not so much exchange of people from one place to the other. If you are working in academia, it's clear you need to publish, right? So this is what is going to give you, to get you credit to move forward in your career. Whereas in industry, we are like, we want to get the asset and move forward with the asset. So the problem, I would say, is that now we know, and I think that's a very good thing, that we know that we want to work. We need to work together. We need to collaborate. But still, many times when we get together, we see the projects, and you see that the projects that we get, that we evaluate, they are not the way that we would have liked. So it's like, there is this thing missing, this other thing missing. I'm not, again, as Bernard was saying, I'm not blaming that on academia. So I'm blaming that on the fact that we have not been talking to each other for so long that it's difficult, that if something starts from scratch and moves in the, let's say, in the academia pathway, when it gets to us, if it moves without any involvement from our side, when it gets to us, it's difficult that it's the way, I mean, that it's got all the ticks that it needs to move forward. And in fact, it's Bernard was also saying that. So open innovation is like logical, right? So when you think about that, before we were like working internally and trying to make all the R&D, all the research internally, but big as we might be, 99.999% of all the innovation of all smart people are not working for us. So we need to tap into that, and we can do that by also helping them financially or otherwise, and moving forward. But I think we certainly need to work together. The earlier that we start working together, the better.
I can try to put to add to the perspective. From my vantage point, I think the main obstacle to technology transfer is a sheer volume of technology that can and needs to be transferred, and the dearth of people who are trained in doing that or even understand that. And I explained this. The innovation, as I explained in my introduction, has changed. It used to be that everything was done within the lab of large pharmaceutical companies, and when the companies realized that, boy, there's so much out there that really looks exciting and more than we can do, ourselves, they tried to figure out ways to retool the model so they could accommodate more and more innovation. They could increase, in other words, the size of the internal pipeline. And the way they did that was by developing the capability to manage networks of innovation. So the research was no longer done in-house. they started to form teams to kind of scout the environment out there and identify bright ideas that worked on paper. New discoveries that could produce potentially new drugs to treat, awful diseases that had no other treatment. But there is a difference between working on paper and working in a patient. A lot of this really deserved to be done, deserved to be funded, but they couldn't be funded internally. It couldn't be done internally. So the industry evolved and basically adopted or developed the capability to work with smaller companies, to work to manage this innovation network, to work, to abandon the old model that says, I give you the money, you give me your asset, and then I don't want to see you anymore, to, hey, let's work on that together. Let's, you have something interesting. Let's develop a roadmap of what needs to be done in order to bring that new discovery to market. And let's decide, who's going to do what. And frankly, you know your asset better than we do, and you have some capabilities that we don't have, and we're interested in you doing all you can and perhaps supplemented what you don't have, so that together we can march faster and do it better. And companies have been fairly successful at growing that capability. I've worked with a number of them, and I've seen it, and it's been amazing to see that change in culture. But as scientists continue to do their work, they keep coming up with even more interesting stuff, and therefore this tech transfer as becoming a smarter way to do drug R&D, to do research. But the management of that operation, the ability to manage that network of innovators is still a scarce capability within the industry. And I've seen some example of failure of people who had been doing great things within pharmaceutical companies, but they had this ability to, do it internally. They didn't really understand or were not capable to manage that network of innovation. And when they found themselves in a position where they had to do that, they failed. So it shouldn't be taken for granted that, hey, we understand you have all that innovation that is sprouting everywhere in the industry, and we're going to take some bright people and basically, ask them to manage, those network innovation. It's a capability that is not innate and needs to be developed. And that is an area where I think the industry and academia need to work together, how to train people who can do those sort of things.
Thank you, Bernard. Henrik, would you like to add something?
Oh, yes, a lot of wise words, of course, but I think I will take a slightly different perspective, which probably ends up in the same logical conclusion, but that is also challenging research and the foundation for research. Working very closely with very good, solid researchers, I try to challenge them to make utilization the driving force of research. Societal challenge-driven research in a much bigger context. And this kind of boils down to research methods as well. How we do research today is dominated by internal quality measurement systems rather than external quality measurement systems. So we favor research that is good for research's own sake, not that is good for society. And this is, of course, because it's tricky. It's very difficult to measure societal effects. And hence the quality system has kind of took the easy path. And when I ask what is quality of research, they kind of come up empty-handed unless they talk about methodology. We follow the procedure, we follow the process, because that gives us excellent research. And of course, as a mathematician by training, I said, okay, let's factor that one out. What's left? And of course, I was trying to get them to say, use for society would be a quality indicator. But we need to really balance this, I think. So research funding, but also how we organize the universities is something that we really need to take into account here, because I think that's one of the key issues, at least what I see in Sweden and the Nordic countries, but definitely my knowledge of Europe is not that vast on the detail level, but I kind of get the same information from people in the network. So how do we actually make universities better managed in order to get utilization to be a balanced part? I'm not saying the only part. So this, I think, is actually one of the biggest challenges that we have. And I do know that industry is misbehaving many times over the years, so to say, tobacco industry, making it, saying that nicotine is actually good for your health and all those bad things that industry has traditionally done. And also know that that given the researchers, the power of the research funding was based in 1945. It was a Franklin Delano Roosevelt advisor that actually said that politicians are not good at this. We should hand this over to the researchers. I'm arguing that in a democratic society, we actually should let the politicians and industry back into the equation, because right now we're actually doing excellent research, but more for research own sake. And we need to make sure that research is better used in society. And this is a tricky path. I'm not saying it's simple, but we need to start talking about it. And unfortunately, there are some bad things, because also universities is kind of led to manage their own business. And universities' business is actually bringing in money for research. And that has the disadvantage that, taking an analogy here, we have a zero vision for traffic in Sweden. 0 people should be killed in traffic accidents in Sweden. That's the vision of the government. We're not there yet, but we're getting closer because we have an ambitious target. For me, when it comes to health and cure, we should have a 0 vision. 0 patients should be taken to a hospital. We should actually manage people healthcare-wise, so they didn't have to go to the hospital. But traditional medicine is very heavy and such a big actor, so this is not seen as a good thing, at least not in Sweden. And I do think that we have some issues on the global level as well here. Preventing people from becoming ill should be much more on the target of research than actually curing them after becoming ill. So this is just an indicator that we don't really take the societal challenges. And with the societal challenges comes utilization. And that comes with tech transfer, of course, a new profession that we need to take into account when we hire people for academic positions. So just returning to my former employer, Gothenburg University, they have a 600 million euro turnover, essentially. And of course, it's essentially 50% education and 50% research. It should be 1/3 utilization, 1/3 research, and 1/3 education, if we take utilization seriously. So that's kind of where I stick my neck out, as you understand.
Yeah.
But how do we get this to happen?
Well, this is not an easy question, Henrik. I like the fact that all of you have been very challenging with your responses, with your answers. I see something in common in the 3 answers, that each one of you is pointing very clearly at a very serious gap between university and industry, a very serious cultural gap, and not only cultural gap, also a serious, I would say, a functional gap, because objectives are quite different. And each one of you addressed it from a different point of view. I think, Henrik, that what you just mentioned is very challenging, and it creates food for thought, but there will be people, I assume, among the audience and myself. I come from an academic environment that will argue that it is important to let researchers do academic research, basic research, and follow their curiosity, their academic curiosity, and not to force them to research only in very applicative areas with a very specific use. Having said that, today, a lot of researchers are very interested in researching very useful and very applicative issues. But my opinion is that you should have a good balance between basic research and applied research, because without basic research, you cannot get to applied research. So you must have both areas of scientific research. Another comment that I would like to add here is that when we talk about researchers and what they are concerned about, of course, they're concerned about their academic careers. They're paid for that. They have to educate. They have to publish. They have to get research funds. And usually they're totally overworked and totally stressed to do these three things. So when you come to them and you talk with them about doing applicative research and filing patents, they say, okay, this is too much for me already. I cannot handle something else. So in my opinion, what do researchers need in order to be more proactive? I think that they need funding. They need funding that is available in order to incentivize them to perform applicative research, to develop their research in a direction that is attractive for industry, attractive for investors, means to a more developed stage of development. I think this is a very serious challenge at the university, to be able to bring technology from TRL 2 or TRL 3 to TRL 4, 5, when the industry starts to be really interested. And also to be connected, and this brings me to the second question, to be connected with other actors in the ecosystem, not only with academic players. So my question now is, how can we establish an effective open innovation collaboration between the different actors, the different stakeholders, such as research institutions, industry partners, entrepreneurs, hospitals, networks? If any one of you would like to address this question.
Yeah, I can take a stab at it. I think you're right to point out that in academia, we have, clearly people who are interested in doing fundamental research and also translating that fundamental research into application. But not everybody in academia is interested in this whole thing. Some scientists are excellent and only interested in doing basic research and not so much into translating that research, because it's beyond their interest, it's beyond their skills. It's for whatever reason they just aren't interested in doing that, and others are. There is some academic scientists who are budding entrepreneurs, and we've got many examples of them being successful entrepreneurs eventually. So I think we need to respect those differences in basically interest and allow people to do what they excel at. If a bright scientist, is great at doing fundamental research, but has no interest in talking to industry about translating that into new medicine, let's allow him to continue to do basic research and continue to turn out knowledge that eventually somebody else will translate into application. On the other hand, we also have, academic scientists who are interested in seeing their discovery turned into a new medicine, and we should facilitate that work. That work, by the way, of translation is is extremely complicated, is extremely intricate. It's not something that people know, as or learn in a university. It is an area where we need to train people on both sides of the fence, the academic scientists as well as the industry scientists, what the process of translation is all about and how to do it more effectively, and so that the collaboration can be more fruitful. So evidently, industry, academia has an interest in getting their science translated because it's a future source of revenue for them, and for industry, it is a source of innovation. But I think at the heart, one needs to realize that innovation is not the result of some, elaborate process, as was once believed. This has gotten us into, major innovation crisis in the past. Innovation is not the result, the outcome of a process, is the outcome of a culture. And we need to establish that culture. It's a shared culture between academia and industry, and we need to understand it, train people to understand it, so that they are primed to collaborate more effectively.
Yeah, yeah. From my side, fully agree with what Bernard has said and also what Elena said, and yeah, maybe, I would like to stress and again what has been said about basic against applied research. So you could think that in industry we are also interested on applied research. That's at the end, that's what we want to transfer into our source of revenue. But you cannot forget that basic science is a raw material. So if there's no basic science, there will be no applied science. And in fact, we have lots of examples where you see that we are failing from the industry to launch new products, like for instance in Alzheimer, and that's basically because we don't really understand the basic science behind that. So we need basic science. That's out of the question. Fully agree that we need to change the culture. So I think that it's much more developed in the US. In Europe, we still have these different cultures in both sides. And then, to answer Elena's original question, I think now, because as I said before, so we have a problem, which is the sort of misalignment, different cultures in academia and in industry that we need to connect. And what you see is that there are some schemes that are being created, which try to bring everything together and to move forward. So for instance, we are involved with other companies in something called the Apollo in the UK, where we want to bring together academics and industry, trying to get to a win-win situation where projects move forward towards the market, toward getting new solutions to patients. Here in Spain, we also have some initiatives, like we are with other partners, of course, like Cancer Innova, or you have initiatives like Mind the Gap, which are all in the same direction. So these all initiatives are still small, but I think we are in the good direction. We are moving in the good direction.
Thank you, Antonio. Henrik,
Yep.
What do you think about this question? What is your perspective?
I will definitely go in there. Just also to comment on the balanced portfolio approach of basic research. Just to give you my original background, I have a background as a theoretical high-energy physicist. 4,000 years to application is my statement. Doesn't mean that I should get away with not thinking about application. And when you argue, you actually also have, and we see that in medicine in particular, I think, there is usually a very clear disease that wants to be cured. But what I'm challenging is how the balanced portfolio should look like. And actually asked global research professors at, for instance, the National Economy Department to actually give me the answer. It should be related to the demography of the industry, demography of the population, the national funding principles, etc. And we should have some sort of idea here. But let's leave that. Sorry, Elena. Just have to say something. When it comes to open innovation, I usually refer to basic principles. If I need a plumber and I know a plumber, I will call my friend. You call your friend. That's a basic instinct. So we need to get closer. And we also talked about this before. We need to have the rules of engagement very clear to us. So we actually don't hesitate about what other people want and what are on their agenda. And once we start knowing each other much better when it comes to the hospital, the university research, and the industry. Because co-location, I think, is one good thing when it comes to this. And you can see good examples. But then on the other hand, you have the problem of secrecy, etc. So you need to solve the practical issues around this, patentability and all that stuff. But if you have the rules of engagement very clear, I think this is the fruitful way, because most people want to learn from others. Most people want to work together. We know that there are brilliant people in industry. We know that there are brilliant people in academia, and it's much easier to work with brilliant people. But you have to get to know them. You have to understand them. You have to understand their driving forces in order to create big win situations for both sides. And then we have the politicians, of course. Politicians are driven by getting elected the next election. That's a tricky equation for us to solve.
Yeah.
They're also a stakeholder here. And how do we actually make sure that academia shines and gets the most prominent ranking on the research, whatever the ranking instruments are called? Industry is making big money because we need to make big money in order to give the shareholders a return of investment. And then again, we need to give proper cures to our patients, and we need to let the politicians get their big win as well. So this is the tricky equation. So what I'm saying is also that we need to get closer to the politicians. We actually need to make them understand that this is a tricky part. And I think openness extends beyond just open innovation in that sense. Because I think we sometimes, at least in Sweden, fail. I'm in Gothenburg based. I spend far too little time in Stockholm. A lot of people from Gothenburg never put their foot in the government agencies in Stockholm and believe that they can actually do a good job. I think they have to show that there is another interest party here that we also need to engage in the discussion. When it comes to national organizations, I was very much happy to go to the UK-based one because they actually had a very good annual meeting where there were politicians and funding agencies present talking to the tech transfer people in a way that I haven't seen in Europe or in Sweden. Maybe it exists at autumn. I haven't seen it at autumn conferences to that extent. I actually think the British were best in the game here. So rules of engagement, getting to know each other, but don't forget the other stakeholders as well.
But I think,
Please go
Henrik,
ahead, Bernard.
you said something interesting in your previous intervention, and I don't want to let it go because it's very relevant to our discussion today. You made the point that pharmaceutical industry see themselves in a business of bringing new drugs to market. And your point is, well, that's good, but we should look at the broader driver of health and work on keeping people healthy so they don't need those drugs instead of just focusing narrowly on drugs. And I think this is a very well taken comment because the research that has been done shows that there's a lot to be gained by working. There's a lot of low-hanging fruits in those drivers of health. Improving the diet, for example, is something that whose business is it is to improve people's diet. We need to pay more attention to those things, and some companies have, kind of thought through that, and some of them have said, well, it's not really our business. Our business is just pharmaceuticals. But more enlightened companies have realized that, well, it is our business because our business is to keep people healthy. It's not just to deliver drugs. But this is where it becomes interesting because a company like J&J, for example, decided, well, working on nutrition is not really something that we know how to do within Johnson & Johnson, because historically we've worked on, on medicines. But we have an outreach organization called Janssen Lab, which is basically a network of incubators that has about 400 or 500 company startup in that network. And they manage that network in order to access areas of research that didn't really fit narrowly within the J&J organization. And they have a dozen of those startups working on those drivers of health. So this is a good example of a company, with enlightened management who recognize that, hey, we don't want to be too narrow. You look at the tech, all the discussion that we have today, for example, about the, intervention or the input of tech into health management. The tech people in Silicon Valley will tell you, hey, we've got smartwatches, we've got, data, we've got biosensors and all that gives you all kind of information. And with that information, we can enable, people to manage their health better. And it's a budding area. It's more theory than practice at the moment, but there is a lot of promise. And the smart companies really recognize that it's not something that we've traditionally done. It's not really a drug. But hey, maybe you could have an app that helps people manage their health, monitor and manage their weight, or keep mentally agile and that sort of thing. But since they don't really have expertise in-house in order to do that, they have to reach out. And this is when, smart business model or research model like the JLab model that J&J has pioneered is very useful, because it allows those companies to broaden their scope of activities, their scope of research, and basically become better at ultimately delivering health to patients, which is what we all want.
Yeah. If I may, Elena, yeah. So Bernard, thank you for calling us an enlightened company. Certainly, since many years we embarked in this concept of disease interception, which is actually what Henrik was talking about. So trying to get into the disease before it becomes untractable. So I think that's the way to go. Then I also wanted to make a comment on a very interesting point that has been raised by Henrik, and that's regarding the politicians. The politicians' job is to get re-elected. That's the way it is, right? And then we have another cultural problem, and that's if we want them to be favoring this sort of collaboration with industry, we have a very high barrier, which is that we in pharma, I'm very well aware of it, we don't have a very good press, right? So sometimes you get, and I have heard some very smart people saying, but you from pharma, you go and you steal the drugs from academia and you sell them and you get all the money. So that's something that's in the public. So I think there, I believe that we also need to work on that culture, and that's really telling the public at large what we are doing, the way we are doing. We have done things that are not so nice in the past. That's we need to recognize that very honestly, but just tell people what the business of creating new drugs is, what we do, and trying to overcome this prejudice, because I think this is actually very harmful, because a politician will act depending on what people believe, not on reality, because this is what will be driving the votes. So I think we need to work on that, and I think it's up to us, mostly up to the industry, and we should be better at that.
Thank you, Antonio. I am also managing the time of this roundtable, so I have to bring you to the last question. But just a remark before going to the last question. I like very much what each one of you had to say about potential solutions to establish better communication between the different stakeholders. Some things that I remember are, for example, the need to establish collaborations between industry and academia that allow for collaboration. and this can be joint development, for example. You mentioned, Bernard, for example, the Johnson & Johnson laboratories, where things happen at the more open level, where there are collaborations between industry and academia. I think that he was Henrik who mentioned the need to get closer to the industry. This is something that I think it is extremely important. When we need a plumber, we call our friend. I agree with you, Henrik, totally. I think that when we are at the academia and we have certain companies, certain industry that are close to our university, they are the first we call when we have a new development. So it is very important for university to have a close circle of industries, of companies that follow their new developments. I encourage, in every talk I give, I encourage research institutions and academia to develop these business clubs or business advisory boards and bring people closer. I also like the example that Antonio gave of Apollo, and I would like you, Antonio, to mention maybe this in my last question, because I think it's very relevant. And if I am not wrong, there is one experience of this type in Spain. Maybe you can mention that as well. And well, of course, in my opinion, public funding has a huge role in crossing the valley of death and moving academic technology from the university to the industry. And here you have the role of the government and the role of the university and the role of the politicians. Yes, I would love to see something like you mentioned, Henrik, about these meetings they have in the US with politicians, universities, companies. I haven't seen that in my own country, not so much in Israel. I am based in Israel. Regretfully, I cannot see that too much. Politicians are too busy trying to get elected again and again and again. But maybe in Spain, we can see a movement in that direction. Maybe Antonio can comment or someone from our audience. So my last question: what should be the role of the public sector in the dynamization and promotion of licenses and spin-offs? I would like to call this more university industry collaborations. Are public-private partnerships essential nowadays?
Yeah, maybe I can take this since you mentioned this initiative in Spain. So yeah, my answer to this, I think yes. I think public institutions should really be involved. And about this example, I briefly mentioned that before. So now it's actually the second one we are in. The current one is called Cancer Innova. The first one was called IDD2. And there we were with the Galician government. They are very small initiatives, right? So the first one was like sort of a pilot. And the goal was very clear. The goal was to try to cross this valley of death, this gap where university research stops, because this is where they get, and then they are not yet at the point where we from the pharma industry or from VCs, we would like to enter. So we wanted to cross that gap with our internal money, with money from the Galician government, so with public money. In this current version, it's a bit larger. And I'm very happy that we got another company on board. We got Eli Lilly on board, so it's not just Janssen. And we also got a patient organization, the AECC, so the Spanish Anti-Cancer Organization. So we believe we have all stakeholders in this stage. We would be really glad to have VCs in the next stage once they are there. So I think this is the way forward, to try to get everyone together and to try to have everyone collaborate from the start. I think we have an opportunity now with in this very specific situation we are in with all COVID and with the European resilience funds. There is a lot of money. There is a lot of money for R&D. So I would like to see that money really trying to foster this sort of initiatives, this sort of public-private partnerships. I think they probably didn't involve the industry enough in setting up how they are going to distribute this money. It's still not clear, at least in Spain, how this how this will be distributed. But I think if it doesn't work, it will be a missed opportunity, really, to have all this very large amount of money and not to have all the stakeholders, not only industry, but I would say all the stakeholders just advising and saying how this would be more efficiently spent, which, yeah, to me, it would be really fostering these public-private partnerships and taking the good part of each party. So from the academia, of course, yeah, the generation of knowledge, from our side, knowing how to transform this into drugs, and then, yeah, working together towards this common goal.
Thank you, Antonio. Bernard, Henrik, would you like to address also the role of the public sector in the dynamization and promotion of industry and academic collaboration, and the role of public-private partnerships?
Yeah, I think I can try to add to what has been said. I think we've made the point earlier that we will be more successful if both the academics and the industry partners understand the process of innovation so that they can focus on doing the right thing, and they can also have the right expectation about each other. That also holds for politicians. Politicians need to understand the process innovation so that they can pass policies that support it instead of destroy it. And if we look at of all the things that the governments have been doing over the decades to promote pharmaceutical innovation, what has worked? And what has worked is basically the funding of breakthrough science. Today, in the US, we spend some close to $40 billion from the National Institute of Health in funding research. Historically, the bulk of that money has gone to fund what I would call safe science. In other words, stuff that had already been researched, and we were doing more of it instead of funding bold science, which is basically exploring new territory that has not been really heavily researched and which historically has proven to be a more fertile ground in terms of finding new drugs. So you have $40 billion to spend, and are you going to spend them doing safe science or doing bold science? And the research is very clear. The return that we will get from that investment will be much, much higher if we fund bold science as opposed to safe science. But getting that translated into facts has been very difficult because, well, there's a lot of people who are making a very good living today from the dysfunctional research system that we have, from spending $40 billion researching stuff that we already know. There's a lot of people who benefit from that, and therefore those people are basically fighting to continue with a sort of inertia. So it helps to have scientists, or not politicians at the other end, to understand that so that they can basically push the right policy into laws. And my experience in the US by interacting with some of those people is that they're very open to do that. They actually welcome, people who help them understand what innovation is all about, what's the role of culture, and how they can play a role, they as politicians, in fostering that innovation. They really welcome that. But those initiatives have not really been too numerous. I mean, in the US, the American Institute, which I'm affiliated with, have actually played a leading role in facilitating this dialogue between politicians and scientists and academia, so that we all understand each other better. We understand what the culture of innovation really is, so that we can implement it more effectively.
Thank you, Bernard.
Yeah. Can I just
yes.
essentially that also, thank you, Elena, sorry. That also brings back, kind of ties into one of the first point I made, and you touch upon something very interesting here, Bernard, because the research funding system essentially prevents people from being bold and brave, at least the Swedish one, because it it's very solid for your career to go in the line or direction that you started, and that's the only way you can be a successful academic. Not the only way, but it creates enormous talent and courage to break that path. So it's very tricky. But to tag along also on the original question, public-private partnership, I think it's so important, and even more important now, because if we take a step back and look at society, we have the issue of the aging population, we have the issue of healthcare costs getting out of hand. I think it's like 12% of the gross national product in Sweden, maybe 15 or even pushing 20% in the US. We're on a path that is not sustainable. And of course, this is politicians' decisions that has to be made. They have to drive the policy. They have to take care of democracy for us. Of course, we're also people that elect politicians. So, and the companies has their role, the university has their role. So we need to step up here and help the politicians. I'm not saying we shouldn't let them do it themselves and ask them to point finger at them and say you're doing a bad job. No, we should actually help them here. And my current employer, Volvo, is not health-oriented, as you know, but we're really taking a step forward here and saying that we have a Swedish limited company problem. It's about Sweden. We're here to do our job. We're here to give you taxpayers' return on investment when it comes to, of course, creating jobs in Sweden. We need academia to step up and do the right research for us to tag along and actually create and scale up that research. But then, of course, the politicians need to take their part into this, because it's about sustainability, about CO2 emissions, etc. So I think we need to see a public-private partnership that is much more mature. It's not on the project size, but it's actually on the national size. And we need that kind of norm in society, that industry is not bad. There are, of course, bad misbehavior in industry. Academics are not doing wasting research funding because of their, stubbornness. They're actually providing value, but they do it on a time scale, etc. And politicians, yes, they need to get elected because they actually need to push the right policy. So we should have some sort of, I think, very high-level discussions. Having said that, of course, we also need the public-private partnership when it comes to, as you have said before in this discussion, risk reduction. And just a little cute story, which was enormously funny for myself, was that I was in a management meeting at the School of Medicine here at Sahlgrenska in Gothenburg. And this was pre-COVID. And I said, we should work challenge-oriented. We should take a vaccine from zero to a product in 4 months. And of course, the physician said, that's impossible, right? It takes 10 years. You're naive, Henrik. And then COVID came. I'm not saying it proved me right, but I felt better. But of course, you also see that government stepped in and had a risk reduction approach towards AstraZeneca. I know in particular because it's a company in this city, but I think that also worked in the US as well, where they said that, yes, we will cover your costs if you don't make a profit out of this vaccine. And I think this is a beautiful example where in terms of crisis and in times of crisis, we actually step up. And maybe we need, I'm not saying we need a crisis, but we need to understand that the healthcare cost is a crisis for society. Aging population is a crisis for society. And we need a sense of urgency. And I think we need it now.
Well, I can add a little anecdote for 2 seconds.
Bernard, just a very short mention to Sergio and to all the organizers that maybe you can encourage people present, the audience, to send their questions to us via the chat, so we can start receiving questions while Bernard finish this his comments. Thank you.
Well, about 15 years ago or so, I was at a meeting of a think tank that works very closely with the government. And there was, the heads of major labs there, senior executive in pharma, and they were all, talking about how difficult it was and all that sort of thing. And at the end of the meeting, there was a person leading the discussion who said, okay, I get it. I mean, I understand now the reason why it's so expensive and it has to take 10 years to do anything. But what I'm asking you is that what can you do, you in pharma? What can you do in order to shrink that 10-year timeline down to, say, 4 weeks? And you should have seen the face of those senior executives that, they clearly were not prepared for the question. And for them, I mean, the question was an absurdity. And they were not shy at saying it, basically saying, lady, you just don't know what you're talking about. It's impossible. I mean, if it were possible, we would have done it already. Trust us, we know what we're doing. You're just, it's a dream. It will never happen. And well, it happened for vaccines now. I mean, programmable drugs, programmable vaccines, you've literally designed them on a computer overnight, and then you put them in a plasmid and that sort of thing. So we're going to get there. I told the woman at the time, I said, Mike, I disagree with my colleagues. You're right. And we need to figure out a way to do it in 4 weeks, and we will eventually will. And so we're well on our way to do that. It's going to get better. So moral of the story, go after impossible goals and make them possible.
Well, thank you very much for your very interesting comments in this last question. I would like to, while our audience starts to send us some questions for the question and answer section, I would like you to share with us one lesson that you have learned during your technology transfer career. Of course, each one from a very different environment and from a different experience. But I would like you to pick just one lesson that you think it is worthwhile sharing with everyone in this roundtable.
Yeah. Maybe let me go first. And yeah, even if we are in a table, talking about the goodness of tech transfer, and I'm really convinced about it. But the lesson is that it's not easy, right? It's not easy. I think it's about getting to know each other. It's about following up. So you need to know the other party. You need to know the other party aware of what you're up to, what your interests are. This is like a long distance race. And also, be honest and manage expectations. So sometimes when I started doing this job, it was, I was approaching a certain academic group or academic institution. And not everybody, of course, but you could feel that for some of them, it was, if the industry is coming, they are coming. And that's because they are really interested and they have the money to give us. And many times this is not the case. So it's about, as I said, the best thing you can do is be honest, say, I need to know what you are doing. I need to know your research. I want you to know what we are doing. Let's get to know each other. Let's follow up, and let's wait for the right moment and place to go for the tech transfer.
Thank you, Antonio, for sharing this, I would say, experience and also some kind of advice. Bernard, Henrik, would you like to share?
Yeah, I can share something. About 10, 12 years ago, I noticed that a new type of organization appeared in biomedical research, and I would call them a virtual company. Those were companies that typically had 6 to 12 employees, and those employees were typically veterans from the pharmaceutical industry. people who had taken drugs to the market before. They knew what needed to be done. And in those virtual companies, they basically focused on developing the roadmap, developing what needed to be done in order to bring the asset that was in a company, bring that to market. And once that roadmap was developed, instead of doing the work internally, as was a standard back then, they went out and found or looked for labs that had the capability to do, each step that needed to be done. And they hired those labs. And I noticed something interesting, and that is, in an industry that is plagued by very high rates of failure, these virtual companies never seem to fail. And I was really struck. So I started to keep track of all the virtual companies that came across. And at the time, there were, very few of them, just a few dozen. And I kept track of them and looked at what happened to them. And I noticed that not only they did not seem to fail, but in fact, some of them, did IPOs. They generated billions of dollars of return for their investors through IPOs. Others developed, developed technology that eventually cut the interest of pharmaceutical companies, and they got into licensing agreement with those pharmaceutical companies. So the rate of success was actually quite high. And I couldn't understand it because I came from a pharmaceutical company where the mantra is, the failure rate is very high and there's no way to do otherwise. So I went to talk to a friend of mine, a VC, and I said, I need you to explain to me why this happens. And he looked at the data and he said, well, your data is correct. It's a fact. And eventually, he and I started a conversation, and he came back and he said, the reason why, this model is catching on is that if you're an investor and you're funding a company with a very low cash burn because they don't do internally, they have very low overhead, they have very small office expenses, administration expenses, everything is spent on funding the work that is being done through partners. If you work like this, several things will happen. Number one, if your asset fails, it's very easy to retool the company and reposition it because you don't have hundreds of people that you don't know what to do with. So it's very flexible and very nimble. The second thing is that if you go and try to find lab to do the work that needs to be done, you're going to find lab who are between contract, for example, and they have the capability to do the work, but they will do it for marginal cost as opposed to fully allocated cost because they're just trying to pay the bills, while they are in this idle period, and you'll end up doing research much more cheaply. So if you succeed at the end of the day, your return will be enormous because you've spent very little money and everything is profit. If you fail, you haven't spent a lot of money, and you can reposition yourself, very quickly, so that you're back in business. And in fact, that's exactly what we saw. There's in that population of 35, 36 companies that I was tracking at the time, there was one company that failed at some point, and within 6 months they had repositioning themselves, gotten their asset, and they were in business. So one actually company that I ended up being associated with noticed that and decided that there was a business of opportunities there to create a platform, kind of a clearinghouse that would match the people who have the capability to do drug development work and the companies that work to be done. And that platform, the company is now called Scientist.com, and that platform has been very successful. It has been, on the list of most fastest growing company that is published by the Financial Times for the last several years. It went from $0 in sales in 2016 to over 350 million last year. And interesting things. Most of the business now comes from the large pharmaceutical companies who've seen that, way to reach out to partners, to manage that innovation network as an essential capabilities, and are using the platform in order to find who can do the work quickly and, in quality work. And so it has been a model that has become very successful. And
perfect.
But
yeah, very interesting, Bernard. Sorry for speeding up a little bit the conversation, because we have some questions coming in, and I would like, Henrik, just before we move to the questions, to know if you have one final remark in this regard regarding something that you have learned in your career.
Yeah, I'll try to keep a bit brief, but believe in your strategic goals and make sure that you build from the bottom up. Do it in a solid way and make sure for me is about trusting other people that they can do the job as good as you. I was one of the lucky persons that got the possibility of initiating the SNIT's National Organization for Tech Transfer, and it's alive today, 10 years later, which I think is good. We didn't have it. There were many people in Sweden who advised me not to do it because it's a waste of breath. I think we've proven them wrong. I don't understand why you can't be innovative if you're working with innovation, but that's also something to ponder about, because we need to love change. And I think the examples that Bernard gave us and Vicente gave us is that change is what that drives us. But change also means that you need to move away when some other people that can actually do a better job is there to take up that challenge. So I think that's my advice. Really believe in what you think and what your strategic goals are, but be also very ready to hand it over to somebody else, because that's how you build something solidly. And that's where when I look back at my career, I've been successful when I let somebody else take over the job after I'd done my part. And do that with joy. Don't do that with control. And try to get rid of all the "it's my baby" things. So you need to hand over the company to somebody else when you can't really do the best job anymore. Things like that. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Henrik. I want to add my remark, because I come from my previous experience. Today I'm in the consulting field, but from my previous experience I got from the university. And what the most important lesson that I have learned in my life about technology transfer is that you don't transfer patents, you transfer knowledge, you transfer technology. So what you need to transfer is something that is all the time evolving, all the time developing. So the mechanisms for technology transfer are not only the old-fashioned license agreement. I license a patent, I get paid my royalties. This is a little bit old-fashioned. Today, we learn that to transfer technology, we get into a process. Like Antonio said, it's not about, oh, Johnson & Johnson came to visit me, they're going to sign a license agreement with me and we're going to make a lot of money. It's about starting the process to get closer, to do some collaborations together, to get to know each other, like Henrik was mentioning before, and maybe even at the end to incubate this technology and make it grow by one of those virtual companies that Bernard was mentioning, and which today are actually the type of biotech companies that we see here in Israel and that we see there in Spain. Companies that are a spin-off of universities with 4 or 5 employees, and everything is subcontracted. They keep themselves very, very, very lean, very, very smart, and they are investable. So I think that all these are lessons that I learned. Technology transfer is not one hit and you run. It's a long process. It takes sometimes years, to see good results. And I would like now to pose a question. And after this question, we will end this session, this very interesting session. The question is, tech transfer relies on many stakeholders, such as universities, policymakers, researchers, companies, investors, etc. Which actor do you think should start the change so tech transfer is easier and smoother?
I go with the money, and the money resides with the policymakers and the universities, because that's where the biggest changes are needed, I think. Sometimes I kind of ponder about companies versus researchers, and I think the incentive for the companies to do their proper job is legally constrained sufficiently well. We have all the auditing processes, we have the shareholders legislation for companies in Sweden, etc. It's non-competition rules and all that stuff. That's quite well set into a system. But we don't have that for research funding and actually for research at universities. And I think that's where the biggest challenge is. Publicly funding research, going for the bold research, actually cherishing the people that actually can move the needle, and at the same time making sure that utilization is important. That's actually for the policymakers and the universities together. Industry can just stand by and encourage, invest if possible, but also clap their hands when they're doing a fantastic job that they're going to.
Thank you, Henrik. Antonio, Bernard, would you like to address this question?
Yeah, I agree with Henrik. Money talks, and government money as well as industry money. Those enormous amount of money that are spent by both government and industry can make enormous difference if they are applied right versus wrong. If you keep funding research, as we see in Alzheimer, for example, on stuff that have already failed for years, for decades, you're not going to go very far or very fast. If you explore new pathways coming out of emerging biology, new ideas on how to tackle this dreadful disease, you're likely to be successful sooner, faster. So that's important. We see another illustration of that principle today in the US, where we have a debate about a new organization called ARPA-H, which is basically a copycat of the DARPA model, basically a small organization of people who can do whatever they want. They don't have to follow any rules. They can fund whatever they want. As long as it's disruptive. By law, it has to be disruptive. In the non-biological science, this kind of approach has given us, things like the internet, like the GPS, like, all kinds of breakthrough innovations. And we're trying now, the government is trying to do the same thing for biomedical research, but getting a lot of pushback in the process, pushback from people who have vested interests in the old model, or people who don't really understand what this is all about. So, another reason for people to understand what innovation is all about, how we can, be fostered by a greater collaboration between all the parties, and it's going to take some determination in order to overcome the vested interest too.
Yeah, I remember when I started working on open innovation, 10 years ago or something like that. I prepared a presentation and I had a slide where I had all the stakeholders and I put the pharma industry in the middle. So yeah, I'm pretty sure I did that because I come from the pharma industry. So from my own view, we were in the center. But the fact is that I think that the most influential for starting all this process is certainly, as you were both saying, the policymakers. So if they create, because they are the ones that have the money, but they have the capability of aligning everybody else on the same route. So yeah, I would say politicians and creating all these schemes, but I think they need to be smart enough to have all the different stakeholders. They are involved, engaged in designing the schemes, in designing these schemes, so that they are smart enough to be able to deliver. So yeah, I think maybe to finish just as I started, I think at the end of the day, it's a question of working all together, of getting all together. And here, I heard once, it was they told me it was an African proverb that which says, if you want to go fast, you better go alone. If you want to go far, you'd better go with others. So yeah, I think this is our business.
Thank you very much to the three of you. I think it has been really a very interesting discussion. I myself, I have learned a lot, and it was a pleasure to be together with people coming from different countries, different experiences, and coming from the industry, not only from the more, let's say, typical university technology transfer milieu, which is my background. My answer to this question, to Vicente's question, is that yes, I agree with my colleagues that policymakers, public funding, but structure in a way that really pushes disruptive innovation, like Bernard said, bold ideas, like Henrik said, or like Antonio said, going together, but to go far, not only fast. This is a key message that the four of us have to want to convey. So I bring back the microphone to Sergio and to the people of Xartec. Thank you very much, Xartec Salut, for giving us the opportunity to hold this very interesting roundtable.
And thank you for you all. I think it was an amazing discussion. You brought really interesting topics and ideas. So I thank you a lot for coming here, and also in behalf of all the attendees that were here and that were also attending your views. So as there is 1 minute, maybe we leave the session here. And of course, any further discussion that we hope appears, you can address to myself or to other Xartec members. And I think it was great. So thank you so much for being here. And also Bernard, that it's not it's in the middle of the night. So thank you especially for you, and thank you also Elena in Israel and the rest of you. So thank you having you here. It was great.
Thanks to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.